Hi, it's Tanya from Mind, Body, Spirit, Healthy, and this is episode 1 of Trauma Talk, but it's actually the third post for the blog. So I'm just going to call it 3. And since it's my talk, I guess I get to decide whatever I want. So I'm not sure exactly how this whole trauma talk is going to evolve, being that this is the very first episode. I do know that I hope to have guests on at some point, and I do want to talk about different therapies and different modalities or techniques that are available. I also want to talk about mental health, and I want to talk about the different aspects: anxiety, depression, even panic disorder, and complex PTSD and trauma. And just, different tips in techniques and how to overcome those things or how to better manage them at the very least. I like to say that I have healed my trauma, and that is true, but I'm never fully healed from anxiety and depression because those are things that come up when the coping skills or the amount of weight that you're carrying exceeds what you're able to cope with at that time. So we're all potentially able to have that happen. So in episode 1 of Trauma Talk in my blog, I talked about how mental health, and more precisely mental illnesses such as anxiety and depression, are similar to addiction in the fact that you are always at risk of a relapse. So the stacks and the piles can overwhelm, and it can overwhelm us all. And lately I have been overwhelmed. I had to take a knee and I had to recoup. It was difficult to make this decision, but when your body shuts down on you, you have to listen. So I actually had to pause a little bit and draw back a little bit. I was having a lot of panic attacks, lower level ones that weren't debilitating to the point where I couldn't move. I've had those before where I have been paralyzed by it. But in this situation, it's where your entire body is trembling and your temperature plummets and you are very unsettled. That's pretty much the level, and I have to spend some time doing calming techniques to break out of it. So I've been doing that a lot more, and I did a live one earlier today because of that panic. So I have functional neurological disorder, and what that means is that I convert stress into symptoms of multiple sclerosis, meaning that when things get beyond my capabilities of coping with, I can demonstrate symptoms from multiple sclerosis, such as balance issues. For me, it was specifically my knees would buckle, making me a fall hazard, which is always fun when you're in your 40s. But I don't think it's fun at any time. But I also have some cognitive issues, and it causes an increase in fatigue and things like that. So I will have issues finding words, or I will misuse words. So I would maybe want to say something like captain and say something like cartwheel instead. So things like that. When I start noticing those happening more, it's kind of a trigger for me. So when I start having these difficulties finding words or misusing words, it's an indication that I am at a moderate or severe level of stress. I don't know if you've experienced that before, but if you have experienced where your body just shuts down or just rejects or reacts in such a powerful way that it prevents you from doing something. If you've ever had that happen, just let me know. Send me a message, private message me if it's something that you really don't want to share with other people. If you want to just keep it private between us. But if you've ever experienced that, just let me know. I know it can be quite terrifying, especially when it gets to the level where your body shuts down completely and you're paralyzed. So I do have some techniques for assisting with that. So one thing I learned through the process was ways to watch for my signs. So you have signs too, and yours might be completely different from mine. or they might be completely the same. And that's the other tricky part about anxiety and depression, is that we all display them differently. We all come with our unique strategies based on our experiences and our knowledge and our individuality. So my personality and my childhood, my upbringing, the traumas that I've suffered, my unique perspective of the world, that's going to change how I'm going to demonstrate my anxiety. Just as a little tidbit of information, we all do display it differently. So we have to come up with our own unique strategies that are based on our experiences and our knowledge and our individuality that can help us to function on a day-to-day basis. So I know when I'm starting to falter and when I'm starting to, my stress is starting to increase and my mental health is maybe a little bit at risk, I guess, I start to lose my routines. So typically I get up in the morning and the first thing I do is meditate, and then I walk my dog, followed by a workout and then a shower. So if I skip workouts or I skip a shower for a day and have it the next day, or if I stop meditating, those are indications to me that there's something going on. And there's other routines that I have in throughout the day that I have to keep in place. So again, when they start to falter, I can look at it and say, what's going on? What's the stress level? Why have I given that up? I also start to feel my anxiety peak easier. So an example would be, I can talk about my past and how I healed without issue. It doesn't trigger me, it doesn't cause an emotional reaction, and that's how I know that I've healed from it. However, when I am suffering from a lot of stress and I know that it's at a higher level, it causes my panic to get triggered. So I get that trembling throughout my body and that decrease in temperature, and my heart rate gets elevated and my breathing gets shallowed. So again, I'm okay. I can tolerate it. And it just, when it happens, it reminds me to take a moment and self-soothe. So I'll do things like a little mindful moment, maybe some rocking, some hugging, some rubbing my arms, just reminding myself that I am capable of keeping myself safe. I feel more emotional. I'm more easily brought to tears. So I have to be cautious with how I respond. I have to pause and think a little bit longer before speaking to make sure that it isn't emotionally charged, because I know that my emotions tend to be a little bit on the edge at that point. Focus is a little more difficult, and that makes sense because when I'm preoccupied with catching the dip, you feel that dip and you're like, oh no, and I'm trying so hard to revert it, and I know I've got to quickly get those self-care things back in place. Well, of course, I'm focused more on that and splitting my focus between my self-care, my mental health, and my stress level versus my normal productivity. But anyone that has healed trauma and has depression and anxiety will more than likely agree that as you're healing, the up and down and back and forth process, it makes you fearful. Like, you actually, when you feel that dip, you're like, oh no, how bad is this one going to be? Am I going to have the coping skills and the resiliency to pull myself out? So it does trigger that little bit of a fearful thing, and then you have to remind yourself, you've put the toolbox there. It's got all those different tools in it, and you're going to be fine. You just have to go through the toolbox and find the right tool for the right situation. So I just go through and pick my things. So other signs of depression or anxiety, because like I said, that's not an exhaustive list at all, but other signs are a decrease in a joy in activities that used to bring you pleasure. So if your mind won't stop with the negative train, it's understandable why activities aren't as enjoyable as they usually are. It doesn't help that the depression in and of itself is just a drain. It's like a sink full of water without the drain, just pulling it down and spiraling. That's what depression does. It starts slowly, and that's why it's really important to acknowledge the early signs that you're about to slip. Okay, so As you get closer to the drain, it spins faster and faster and faster. And that's because you've let go of those coping habits. It's the stress load, the issues pile more and more on top. So you get further and further back, and it just gets heavier and heavier. So it's important to have your list of signs and symptoms that you are headed towards depression, or you're headed towards anxiety, or you're headed towards a crisis, even, to understand what your triggers are or what your signs are that you're sliding backwards, so you can start doing the things to pull yourself back up. So crisis level is when you need to seek immediate help. And if you don't have a crisis hotline on hand, you should find that number and make sure that you have it in place. Anyone with any mental health issues should always know how to get a hold of a crisis line. I think anybody should in general. But for us who know that we have anxiety and depression, we should be aware of what supports are available for us and how to get in contact with them. One word of advice is, if you do not know the number for a crisis and you are in an emergency, you have suicidal thoughts, a plan in place, anything like that, those are significant and severe, and you know yourself, you know when you're in a bad situation. If you don't know the number, please contact your emergency department, and they should have the number for someone to contact you, and at the very worst, show up at their door and they will treat you. Okay, we gotta be careful. So get back to here. So the enjoyable activities. Alrighty. So some of the other things that happen is you start to feel maybe like you're drowning, and you stop taking care of yourself at the same level that you typically would. So you might not be eating correctly, you might not be showering, you may not be paying your bills. Depending on the level of that could indicate the crisis level that you're at. If you stop showering altogether, that's a pretty good indicator that you're at a significant crisis level and should seek some support. You need to communicate to your loved ones, especially those that you live with, and your healthcare team if you feel like you're having a significant dip. If you can catch yourself in the early signs, I mean, that's maybe not something that you need to communicate to your healthcare team, but that's something you should communicate with people that you live with. They should know that you're having a lower moment. Another thing that happens with depression is decreased activity. We don't engage in our regular activities. We stop exercising. Sometimes we just want to crawl into a ball and forget about life. When it's hard or it's challenging, and then you add anxiety and depression to the mix, it can feel like the best thing in the world is to just sleep through it. I've thought about it. We do it every single day. We will just watch life go by, right? We absorb ourselves in social media, TV, news, negativity. We eat and drink, and we take drugs to escape the reality that we don't like. So those are just some negative coping habits that depression kind of gets us to circle into. We pacify ourselves with TV and movies or video games or other activities that don't really serve our mental health in any capacity. They just continue to keep that negative spiral going, or they even just keep us from socializing with other people, keep us locked in our own little world. And if we get into the spiral of it, it can really help to keep us down. If you start noticing that you're canceling appointments or groups or social functions, because depression likes to isolate. So when we are experiencing anxiety and depression, sometimes we do it because we feel like people don't understand. Sometimes we do it because we have self-image issues. So we think we're bad, we're negative, we're worthless. Our low self-esteem might mean we believe people just don't want to be a part of our lives. That we maybe have nothing of value to offer, right? That whole I'm not good enough, that big trigger comes up. But I have another little note, and this isn't in the blog, but one thing to be cautious of is the flip side of that, and that's perfectionism. Oftentimes perfectionism is derived from the not good enough camp. It's our way of avoiding that by staying perfect. Well, then of course you'll always be good enough. I've tried working on that for a lot of years, and it doesn't work because you can't be perfect. You can never be perfect. And what is perfect? Who decides what perfect is? So rather than measuring yourself against that, I always just try to operate from the standpoint of achieving excellence or doing better than I did before, having my own standards and knowing that I've met my own goals or my own accomplishments. So just watch out for that perfectionism hang up. So again, with the self-esteem, the whole not good enough, but it's also that sometimes we think we have nothing of value to offer, or that we're just a pest or a bother. How many times have you thought that I'm not gonna talk about this because I don't want to be a pest. I don't want to bother them. They're too busy, right? Sometimes we need to bother people though. The view that people with mental health issues are weak is something that happens in the workplace a lot, where it's assumed that a person with mental health issues cannot be trusted. Their sick day from mental health is frowned on. They are thought of to be frail or delicate. I was actually called Teary Tanya. And I know in my other blog post, I've referred to returning to work and how that has impacted me, and it did significantly impact me. I'd been doing really well in my recovery and had been on track to returning to my executive position, and that created a regression in my symptoms of PTSD, and that was something I really have had to struggle with. It's interesting how when you're in alignment, your mental health changes or your health changes, than when you're not in alignment. So I think that might be an important thing to note. If you're feeling extreme negativity pushing towards you or pushing against you in one direction, it may be an absolute example that that's the direction you should be avoiding. Teary Tanya. Huh. And interesting, it was because I'm a very empathetic person, and as a nurse, I would get wrapped up in the stories of my patients, and sometimes they would bring me to tears. I would be in care conferences with families talking about their loved ones, and I would get emotional thinking about, something sweet that had happened, or even something sad, or I'd cry with a family because their loved one had passed away. So I will take my Teary Tanya tagline and I will keep it. Another thing that can be with depression and anxiety is the feeling of being overwhelmed, but this is also a big one to watch for burnout. If you start to feel really, it doesn't have to be a lot of overwhelm. I mean, we all know how much stress and load we're carrying at any given moment, and if it's a realistic amount. So if you're feeling overwhelmed a little bit and your amount's a lot, then maybe that overwhelm is just that you've become accustomed to a certain level, so you're not recognizing the overwhelm until it's into a severe level. So just keep that in mind. But feeling overwhelmed, so this is a huge indicator of burnout and breakdown. If you're feeling overwhelmed, it's because you are. So you need to lighten your load, put something down, ask for help, reach out to a support team, take more time for self-care and reflection, fill your cup with joy. Reflection is necessary though. And the reason why is you need to understand, why are you overwhelmed? So are you not enforcing your boundaries? Are we allowing people away with things we shouldn't be? Are we doing things more than what we can? Are we taking on more roles or more jobs or more tasks? Are we helping out because we want to be the helper? Are we being too much of the nice guy or the nice girl? Are we meeting everyone's demands and forgetting about our own? So there's all kinds of things that we need to start asking ourselves with the overwhelmed. So is there something that you can let go of? What is causing you the most distress? Often we feel overwhelmed because we are overscheduled, but sometimes it's telling us that we are not in alignment with what our true selves want or need. So make sure that you're paying attention to that. Another one is increased fatigue, and we often overlook this because we just think, oh, it was just a long day, or I didn't sleep right, or whatever. There's so many ways that or so many things that we contribute fatigue to. And it can be a sign of many things, a lack of self-care. It's a very simple one. But increased fatigue can also be from anxiety and depression because they are energy drains. They zap you of your energy because you are actually using it in processing all of those thoughts. You're having an increased pulse. For me, I'm trembling. That expenditure of energy from trembling, that's an increase. So of course I'm going to be a little more tired. And imagine when your brain never stops going, it's exhausting. And of course that's using energy. Of course you're fatigued. Another one is memory issues. So when we are spending so much of our energy dealing with our anxiety and depression, we have little left to help store information. Not to mention, our mind is preoccupied with worry for the future or shame or guilt of the past. When you are preoccupied and living inside your mind, you're not getting all of the information that's coming in from the outside world. So sometimes we're hypervigilant, we're seeing reacting to a lot of stimuli, and that's, you know, that's an issue with anxiety, and, you know, and can be an issue for individuals overcoming trauma. That, you know, that's something that we've done as a coping mechanism. Imagine if you've been in a traumatic situation or suffered abuse of any kind, you're of course going to be hypervigilant of your surroundings. You're going to be looking for more threats, and you're going to be very cautious. But when we are doing that, we're often missing out on like actual information that may be important to us. And oftentimes that's because on the flip side of being hypervigilant, sometimes we just shut down and we become disassociated. There's lots of individuals who have anxiety that when it reaches to a certain level that they just tap out. Their brain shuts down, they block everything off. Some individuals have a specific avoidant attachment type, which is marked by the fact that they avoid that conflict, they retreat, they go away, they disassociate. So that's, you know, something to remember, is that causes memory issues. So don't be too hard on yourself if you're not remembering everything. Just think about where your mental health is and understand that if you are in a heightened emotional state, or you're stressed, or you're under distress, that you may not be able to remember all the information as well as you used to. And especially if your sleep's being being hampered in any way, we need good sleep to be able to keep those memories long term. Okay, so I know this is not an exhaustive list of the symptoms of anxiety or depression, or burnout or breakdown for that matter. I would love for you to comment and let me know what other signs you have noticed, so that we can continue to educate more on what to watch for. Stopping the dip early is very important. So I sincerely feel that more people have depression and anxiety than the statistics allude to. So according to a survey in the US in 2018, 18% of US households reported anxiety. That study was done again in 2020, and it's now 30%. The interesting thing about that statistic is that of that 30%, when they look at a cross-section of the population, Gen Z and millennials, they reported at a 42%. I think it's because we're living in fear a lot. And for them, they've been raised with media, news, social media, phones, and the constant bombardment of negativity. And the world's a fearful place right now. At least that's what they make you seem. When I look in my house, I'm not afraid. When I hang around with my family and my friends, there's nothing to be afraid of. When I walk down the street in my town and my community, I'm not scared. When I am out and about in neighboring cities and communities, or out camping in the wilderness, I don't see anything that causes me to be afraid or to fear my neighbors or to fear other people in society. But when I look at the news or when I look at media, it makes me think I should be afraid of everything. When I look at the weather, I mean, I've had heat warnings before, but now they make it seem like it's the end of the world heat warnings. So they're changing how it is. And because we're seeing news from all over the world, we're not just getting what's happening in our towns, we're getting what's happening in your town and everybody else's towns, and it's overwhelming. And they want to show us all that negativity. Why? Because negativity sells. So the news, media, politics, even individuals in your life love making people scared. It drives us to continue to consume more and more negativity. It's a cycle. For example, if you gossip for something at work, what happens? The people that you gossip to, they take the story, they embellish it, they add to it, they change it. Why? Because everybody loves a good story, right? So they want to make it more interesting. And what usually makes it more interesting? It's not to make it more positive, it's to make it more negative. That's what makes it more catchy. The news loves keeping you watching, and they have long known that viewer interest is best achieved through fear. They amp everything up. They, the news and media, put out the worst case scenarios. They've even admitted to they've admitted to a blatant lie. They've blatantly lied in the news and media. And why? Because it's better to get higher ratings right away, and then they can print out their tiny little retraction. But do people see the retraction? No. We've just already been entertained by that big, giant, scary story that they've made us hear and see. So, what gets you to stop the dip? The exact opposite of what depression wants you to do, and oftentimes what anxiety wants you to do. And that is, one, you need to start eating healthy. So getting a really healthy, natural, balanced diet will improve your mood. Sugar and processed food will feed your depressive mood, unfortunately. And a lot of times when my diet changes and I start to notice that I'm reaching for maybe more sweets or cakes or something, that maybe I'm having a little bit of a dip because I emotionally eat. That's something I noticed. Another thing, exercise or move. Getting exercise increases endorphins, especially when you are consistent and you stick to a routine, because a routine also makes you feel good. It makes you feel good when you consistently achieve something. So the more that you accomplish, the better that you feel. It builds up your self-esteem. So don't forget other movements as well. So dance, express yourself any way that you feel comfortable, and let it make you feel like a child. We long since have forgotten to do those things that we did as children. Blow bubbles, paint, sing, dance, just do things that fill you full of joy. Walk, get out in nature, be a present while you're in nature. So look at the trees, look at the plants, listen to the sounds that are out there, walk and pay attention, and maybe even when you're past somebody, say hi and interact. Do that kind of a walk where you really get invested and present in the moment. Listen to the gravel or the grass or the pavement crunch under your feet, or make whatever noise that you get from what you're walking on. But just stay in the present. So those mindfulness, grounding, and meditation, they are also helpful in decreasing elevated emotions through decreasing or changing the thoughts in your head by changing the breathing patterns, and breath work is another thing that I would suggest. And it gets you to learn to be present. Oftentimes they talk about how depression is being focused on the past and anxiety is being focused on the future. So we're all worried and concerned about what's coming. Whereas the depression, you're more ruminating or stuck, and you keep going over something that's happened and the emotional effects of what has happened. So when we stay present, we stay outside of those two things. And one of the things I did when I was recovering was created a mindful technique to really ground me in the present, and also one that allowed me to keep other people's emotions out of my emotional sphere. So I have a mindful technique where the only energy I have that comes in from the outside is either neutral or positive, and I don't allow any negative energy in, and it works really well during distressing times. But so those are some key things. And meditation, I cannot stress enough how important meditation has been in my recovery and in staying balanced. I absolutely love it and fully endorse it. There's a multitude of different types of meditation that you can do. Keep trying different ones. There's mantra ones, there's chanting, there's so many. Just figure out whatever one works for you and go with it. Whatever you do, the biggest thing is just let the thought come in your head and just let it go out. Just don't attach yourself to it. That's the work of meditation. It's just getting to the point where if a thought comes into your head like, oh my God, I have that project due tomorrow, it goes on by, and you don't engage in it while you're meditating to say, oh yes, I do. Oh my God, what did I, what, where do I need, what, and continue on that train. When you get to the point where you're meditating successfully, the thought comes into your head and it just goes on by. After you're done your meditation, you can take the time to sit down and think, okay, about that project, and continue on. So another tip for helping depression and anxiety is socializing. So it's a part of survival. We need connection. We do. The lack of connection, where you are seen, heard, valued, understood, and safe, contributes to our declining mental health. We've become a very isolated society, and the pandemic only further assisted in that. And I'm guaranteeing that's why the reported anxiety is elevated. So we connect on such superficial levels anymore, oftentimes just through text messaging. We don't even take the time to talk to somebody in voice or in person. We just send text messages back and forth, and they're very flat and cold often. And we do the whole, I mean, I'm not in that generation of swiping right. Plus I'm very happily married, so I do not do that. But I hear that's the big trend, right? There's so much out there, so much availability to all these different apps that allow you to just move on to the next thing. And it's a fast food, fast life, fast next society that we have now. So we need to start to look for those genuine connections again. We're starved for genuine connections, and we spend so much of our time alone. We need to bond with people, but we can't do that unless we're authentic, because then you're not truly bonding. If I'm pretending that I'm into sports cars and chugging beers, but I really like nature and yoga, then when I'm hanging out with people that are chugging beers and racing cars, I'm not being authentically me, so I'm not having an authentic connection with them anyway. I'm just playing a game to try to have some connection. So try to look for the ones that are genuine and be authentic and get those. You're worth it, and that's the way that you're going to be the happiest, is by being the most you. So connect more. Pick the best relationship that you have and connect. Call your friends or your family. Hearing a voice is very comforting. Video chat, so you can at least see their face and feel like you're interacting more intimately. Get together in person when you're able to. Physical touch with those that we care about and are close to can significantly improve our emotions. There's so many more ways to improve your mental health. I'll bring you more as we go, and feel free to message me or comment with your own suggestions. Until then, follow your bliss and lead with love. I'm Tanya. I'm from Mind, Body, Spirit Healthy. And I also posted a video earlier where I was going through a panic attack, and I did a calming technique. So if you look at my Facebook, and I'll try to share that through the other medias. If you want to join in, save it and use it later, by all means do. And I hope that it brings you a little bit of comfort and calm into your maybe distressing life that you might be experiencing right now. Anyway.